Alexander, thanks for chatting with me. I really do appreciate it.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you for doing this. This is exciting. Appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. The film is a lot of fun. It's very sweet and also like it moves really well. I just really appreciate it. I was wondering, like, for Alexander, from your perspective, why did you want to tell this story?
Yeah, it's a great question. I kind of got introduced to this idea back in 2013. I got an opportunity to go over to Sweden. My friend Ray was living over there. He was working for BlackBerry at the time, and he's from Canada originally. And he thought he was going to be leaving Sweden, and before he left, he wanted to make a love letter to Sweden called The Philosopher King. So he invited me over to be his first assistant director, and I kind of got the bug of making movies overseas. And while I was there, I sort of, had this idea about a, before sunrise-esque story in Tuscany originally, and kind of worked on it for years. The script, I always joke and say that my first script was absolutely terrible, but it was that terrible first draft that kind of allowed me to like really ponder the idea for years. And I got to know Paul and I got to know Andrea. And I've always been a big fan of music-driven films, films that, diegetically have music as part of the story, like Once, like Inside Llewyn Davis. And, getting to know Paul and his poetry writing, getting to know Andrea and her songwriting, it just felt like this really unique pairing that I hadn't seen before. And I love travel movies. I love movies that, take the audiences overseas. And I love movies that you get to watch two people meet and fall in love on screen. There's just something that's always, I've always been drawn to that. And we were over there shooting October, November of 2019. And then, of course, COVID hit Italy in December, and we had no clue that we were there right before all of this happened. And then, once kind of COVID came to the States and the world shut down, it was no intention of ours in making the film, but the film, through the festival circuit sort of became this, escape for people. Like they couldn't travel. And so the film itself kind of took them on a trip to Sicily. And that was, not planned, but happy that it, gave people an escape during that time.
Wow. So I didn't realize that this was shot right before. And
Yeah.
wow, that must have really affected, shaken you all. I mean, because especially at the beginning, the whole thing was just madness. I mean, the whole thing was madness, but I mean, especially at the starting line.
Yeah. And for us, having filmed, most of the movie, but not 100% of the movie, when things shut down, we, took the movie through post. Things were a lot slower. We had pickups that we had to try to do through the pandemic. And it definitely, delayed our festival run in a way that it probably wouldn't have if nothing would have happened. So, yeah.
Well, I like to, Paul, you mentioned, forgive me, is it Audrey? Andrea, sorry. Andrea's musical abilities are just lovely. I mean, it really, really provides such life to the film. But if I heard correctly, you just said, like, Paul, are you a poet? Did you write some of the poetry for this film?
So, okay. Alex has heard me kind of say this ad nauseum. I don't necessarily consider myself a poet, like a legitimate one. I'll never travel.
Neither did your character, Paul.
Exactly. So, I mean, Alex pretty much molded a perfect character just for me. So I did write all of the original poetry for the film, and Alex actually had a really cool idea for the process of it. So my hero prop, my actual journal, he got that like maybe, I don't know, darn near a year before we started filming. And he was like, hey, this is going to be a prop in the movie, so just start filling it out, So daily I would try to do musings and stuff and try to, reword things and make something that would pop. And then Alex's sort of thing for the film was, I don't want you to really write anything until you're there, until the scenes are about to happen. So that way I can actually write about the experience, organically from what I as Paul and what Hal Flynn are both experiencing. So all of the poetry was written by me in Sicily. Usually it was either the poems were finished like 5 minutes before the scene was shot or whatever. But yeah, that's pretty much how that worked out.
Wow.
And
Go ahead.
If I may just piggyback really quickly, the part two of that is that Andrea didn't write the final song of the movie that she plays for Hal at the end until after we got done filming in Sicily. And so she was able to use some of Paul's poetry in the song and the whole experience of shooting to write that final song for the film as well.
Yeah, and I wasn't allowed to hear it until like the first shot. So I think the first shot setup was on me, just to get my reaction to it. So what you're seeing is a genuine sort of like, you know, like, oh man, this is, you know, and this is awesome. So.
Wow, that adds a whole new layer to the film. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. It actually, it sort of, it adds to the charm of it, you know. Because I actually wondered that. I'm like, well, obviously, you know, she's playing. You know, I'm sure that she wrote it, but the poetry, it could have been something that was just handed to you right before. It said, okay, these are the lines. But no, it's so much more personal. That's fascinating. That's great.
Yeah.
With that in mind, okay, this may be a little ethereal for a question, so bear with me. But I was wondering if, for you both, this film sort of talks a little bit about the soul of the artist. I was just wondering because you've got these two young people who are not just about passionate about their surroundings or each other. They're passionate about creating, and I was wondering, and they have such unique ways of viewing the world. I was just wondering, you know, what is it about the soul of the artist that makes it so unique?
Gosh, that's a great question.
Really good question. I think, oh gosh, that's a loaded question, Steve, but I like it. I think my perspective, sort of the hot take reaction to that would be, it's personal, like to the artist, the creative process and sort of what you want to do. Like, you know, a lot of times I think, especially when you're in the film industry, you finish something eventually to get produced and hopefully to sell and to get as many eyeballs in it as possible. But the way these two are going about it, it's specifically about the art and how it affects them. And I think how it really provides them fulfillment. You know, like Hal, for instance, he doesn't necessarily care if anybody reads his stuff because that's just his way of communicating, you know, I guess artistically, like putting things down on paper that maybe it's a form of meditation or some form of therapy, you know, because of what he's gone through. So I think for me, when it comes down to like the soul of it, it's what I love about it is that it's as personal as you want it to be. And it's very colloquial to the owner of that creativity, you know. That's probably a roundabout answer, but that's probably my best way.
No, that was a great answer. And I think, like, to kind of piggyback off of that, like, this film very much is a love letter to the creative process and, you know, stuff that Paul and I've gone through personally making films and putting our work out there. You know, I'm a big fan of Seth Godin. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he talks a lot about, like, you know, daily writing and sharing your work and taking the leap. And this film, in a lot of ways, is about taking a leap, both on camera and off camera. This was a small crew of friends that showed up in a country where we knew very few people and didn't speak the language and just wanted to make art together. And so it's a little less cynical than, you know, some of your Hollywood productions, in that it's none of us got paid well. None of us did it because it was a job. We did it for the love of it. And so to me, it's special in that way. And especially like getting to work with friends and collaborate with artists like Paul and Andrea that I, you know, deeply respect their work. And for me, you know, they don't need my help getting their work into the world, but if I can, like, you know, make a film that showcases their talents, like, for me, that's awesome. And if I can make people smile and, you know, again, just kind of escape, it will have done its job.
Oh, thanks. And that's a good point. I mean, like, I think the process of us making this film is truly indicative of what the characters are going through. Like, it is a giant, like, sort of leap of faith of, yeah, I mean, it's true independent filmmaking.
Yeah.
How this happened. I mean, all of us were carrying gear all over the place, you know, just trying to make the days. Scenes were shot, you know, and I mean, things went wrong, but we eventually came out with something, you know, and then, I mean, Alex and Joel, our cinematographer, I mean, they have just such a great shorthand because they've collaborated on so many projects. So I think that's, yeah, that doesn't really help, but
No, I think that's good. And one tiny more thing on the creation part of it, like the creative process part of it. Paul and I, our first film that we ever made together was a short film called The Bespoke Tailoring of Mr. Bellamy. And we kind of had that like success right out of the gate. Like we won a $50,000 prize in Shreveport, Louisiana with our short. We had a lot of like positive feedback, a review from MTV talking about it. And then like I personally felt, I can't say about him or anybody else that was involved in the film, but I felt this kind of like, how do I follow this up? You know, even though it's a short film, not that many people saw it in the grand scheme of things. Like I was like, oh, I made something good, and now I have to make something good again. And so that's a little bit of where Josie's character is coming from in the film, is of, you know, trying to follow up success, and what does that mean for the artist, which is like Andrea's like, I don't relate to this character at all, because she has no writer's block. She writes all the time. She's so prolific. But me, like, I put a lot of myself into Josie, because, you know, of those things, you know, feeling like how scary it is to, you know, put something out there. And I will never forget, my sister saw A Chance Encounter for the first time, and she said, I never realized how scary it is for artists to share their work with the world. And I was like, yes, that's what I want people to take away.
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's a great segue, because this was the next question I wanted to ask you both is actually about that. Because Paul, especially your character as well, I was wondering, there's a line where she says you're being modest, and you just say no, just realistic. And I'm wondering where the line is for that. What is the difference between being modest and being realistic when you're in this creative process? Or is that an unanswerable question?
Jeez, coming out with the big ones here. That's good.
I could ask you if you like making movies. I could move it.
Alex, do you have anything?
I think you're right. I think it is a very hard question to answer, and it's a very thin line, because I think we as artists are definitely our biggest critics. At least I am, of my work, you know. And I think that humility and yeah, I think it was, I can't remember what actor it was. I think it was Jack Nicholson, talked about like the second that you think you've done a good job, or the second that you think that was a great performance, you're finished. But like if you're always seeking to improve, if even by 1% or 0.1%, that if you're kind of willing to, you know, accept any accolades that come, but say like, you know, I personally want to grow, I want to get better, I want to look at the artists that really inspire me and do amazing work, and take that 1% of getting better each time, or that 0.1% of getting better each time. And so I think that's where the modesty and the reality comes into play, is that like there will always be a bigger fish. There's always somebody that's doing more amazing things than you could possibly dream of. But aspiring to that is, and knowing that there's no finish line, but that art is always evolving and always growing. And does that answer the question?
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, and I think this is probably where I would say that's such a good question, because if I had to choose, this is probably the biggest dissent between me and Hal. Like, is this aspect, like he sees it as realistic, because he doesn't. I personally do believe that Hal doesn't believe that he has talent, which is why he's so reluctant to share things. Me, I do believe that I am modest. If I have talent, I'm modest about it, and I'm realistic in the same vein that Alex was just talking about. There are just so many wonderful creatives out there, so many great people out there who are doing fantastic things. So it's like the realism is I'm just a part of that world, and it's not all about me. And I think there is something both humbling and modest about looking at it like that, and then constantly looking at growth. And, you know, me personally, I love one thing that I've loved about collaborating with Alex since we've started the company and the people we've worked with is that I'm constantly trying to observe all the people who are better at other things than I am, and appreciating that, and also learning a little bit as well to allow my own personal growth. So it's a bit selfish. So yeah.
I don't think that's selfish. I think what you're saying, I think what you're both saying is phenomenal, because I think it's okay to acknowledge, like you said with Hal, Apparently, the dogs in my house do not agree. I think it's okay to acknowledge there's talent and say, but modesty is different. I think it's acknowledging, but saying, but I can learn and I can grow, and I think you're right. I think Hal is very much in this place where he's saying, I don't. I need to keep this here, but there is somewhat of a blessing of sharing that with one another, not just between the two characters, but sharing art.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so frustrating to Josie about Hal is that it comes to her eye, it comes so easy to him, and she's sitting here going like feeling this burden of, I used to be able to write like that. I used to be able to freely write, and now that I'm in the public eye, I feel this pressure. And so I think that's what's so aggravating about Hal to Josie is that it just comes so naturally, and she's like, why aren't you doing something with this? It's that, to me, that was like always the kind of where the conflict of the film comes from.
And that's honestly, for some weird reason, the past couple of months, I've been hearing from a few people, like, some people who are painters who just like to paint for themselves, and then they'll sell a commission or something like that. It's like the moment, I think from Hal's perspective, the moment it's not for fun, for him, for his own personal, the moment it becomes something that you can monetize or something you can make profits off of, it's like maybe seeing Josie as a cautionary tale for Hal, and he just doesn't say it. It's just like, I kind of like where my life is now with this poetry, and I'm not going to, do that. So I think there is something about trying to mix the two of having passion and making a living off your passion that's interesting.
Totally. And how vulnerable it is to
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that. Yeah. I feel like this film is just a constant test of vulnerability between the characters, like, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great word, vulnerability here, because certainly, I mean, just the idea of sharing with one another is there's such a risk for these characters,
Right.
And to open themselves up in that way, I think it's a real step towards intimacy, and I mean emotional intimacy for them both. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
I know we're running out of time. Paul, Alexander, thank you so much for the time to chat with you. I really do appreciate it. The film's a joy.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I really am glad. Thank you for being so honest with my questions. I really do appreciate that too.
Oh gosh, no, thanks for asking awesome questions.
Yeah, and thank you for taking the time to chat with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, to watch the film. Thank you.
For sure.
Anytime. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Steve. You too.